Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're exploring I'm Okay, You're Okay by Thomas A. Harris. We'll be using excerpts from the book itself. And our mission is to help you grasp the key ideas of transactional analysis, or TA for short, and see how it can help us understand ourselves and our relationships better.
It's interesting how this book delves deeper than typical self-help. Harris presents a whole system for analyzing communication and relationships. And it all begins with this idea of ego states.
Ego states, what are those exactly and how do they fit into this whole TA thing?
Well, in TA, each of us has three ego states: parent, adult, and child. The parent is like that voice of authority we all have inside, the rules and values we absorb from our parents or other influential figures early on.
So like that voice telling us don't talk back or to always be polite, even as adults.
Exactly. Then there's the child ego state. It holds all those raw emotions we experienced as children, that part of us that can still feel vulnerable or playful or even rebellious.
So when I have a meltdown over something small, is that my inner child taking charge?
It's possible. And here's something Harris suggests. Many of us, even as adults, operate from a not okay child ego state. We still carry those feelings of needing approval and seeking validation from others, just like we did from our parents as kids.
That makes sense. But doesn't everyone have these ego states? What makes TA unique then?
Well, what's fascinating is that TA doesn't just describe these states. It helps us see how they interact and how they influence our behavior, especially in relationships. To really grasp this, we need to look at this concept of early recordings.
Early recordings, is that like our brain keeping a record of everything from childhood?
Imagine this.
Yeah.
You're in a tense conversation with your boss. Suddenly you feel overwhelmed with anxiety, almost like you're a child again, feeling powerless. That intense reaction could be linked to an early recording, a past experience where you felt similarly criticized or dismissed, maybe by a parent or teacher.
So even if we're not consciously aware of them, these past experiences can shape how we react in the present.
Precisely. It's like our brains can store not just events, but the feelings associated with them, even from when we were very young.
That's incredible and a little unsettling at the same time. But how do these early recordings connect to the parent, adult, and child ego states?
Well, those early recordings shape our parent and child ego states. The messages we heard, the way we were treated, all those experiences become a part of who we are.
So our parent ego state is a collection of those recorded rules and admonitions, and our child ego state holds all those past emotions and feelings.
You got it. And understanding this dynamic is key to unlocking the power of TA.
Okay, I'm seeing how this connects. We have these ego states shaped by our early recordings influencing how we interact with the world. So what's next? How do we use this knowledge to improve our lives?
That's where the real magic of TA comes in. It starts with understanding how those ego states play out in our interactions with others. We call these interactions transactions.
Transactions. So we're not talking about money here, are we?
Not in this context, no. In TA, every interaction, every exchange of communication is a transaction. And those transactions can be analyzed based on which ego states are involved.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break this down for me. How do these ego states come into play in everyday conversations?
Well, there's different types of transactions. For example, a complementary transaction is where the ego states of the people communicating match up smoothly, like a calm, rational discussion between two colleagues, both operating from their adult ego states.
That sounds ideal. What about when things get more heated?
That's when things get a bit trickier. Harris talks about cross-transactions where ego states clash. Like you're asking your partner a simple question from your adult state, but they respond with a critical parent lecture.
Ouch! I can definitely see how that would lead to conflict.
Exactly. And these cross-transactions can often lead to what Harris calls games.
Games. Now this is where it gets interesting. Tell me more about these games.
Now, these aren't the fun and games we typically think of. In TA, games are patterns of communication with ulterior motives, often played unconsciously to protect our not okay feelings and avoid true intimacy.
So even if we think we're communicating honestly, we might be playing these games without even realizing it?
Often that's exactly the case. And understanding these games is crucial for breaking free from unhealthy patterns in our relationships.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Ego states, early recordings, transactions, and now games. I'm seeing the complexity of human interaction in a whole new light. But where do we go from here? How do we actually apply all of this to our lives?
That's what we'll dive into further. But first, I want to introduce you to another key concept: life positions. These are the fundamental beliefs we hold about ourselves and others. And they play a huge role in shaping our interactions and relationships.
Life positions sounds intriguing. So we have these ego states, but then we also have these underlying beliefs about ourselves and others that influence how we communicate. I'm ready to unpack this. What are these life positions all about?
Well, think of life positions as lenses we view ourselves and others through. Harris describes 4 main life positions, and they're all based on whether we see ourselves and others as fundamentally okay or not okay.
Okay, I'm seeing a theme here with this okay concept. What are these 4 life positions then?
The first, and probably the most universal, is I'm not okay, you're okay. It's the position we're all born into as infants. Totally dependent, feeling small and vulnerable next to all these powerful adults around us.
Right, babies can't literally do anything for themselves, so they naturally see themselves as not okay. But does everyone grow out of this position?
Sadly, not for everyone. For many people, this I'm not okay, you're okay position can linger into adulthood. Think of someone who constantly needs approval from others, or struggles with low self-esteem, or feels intimidated in relationships. They might be operating from this early position.
So they're carrying those feelings of being less than from childhood into adulthood. What about the other life positions?
The second position, I'm not okay, you're not okay, is a much darker place. This often comes from severe neglect or abuse in childhood. It's a feeling of despair and hopelessness, where someone sees both themselves and the world as fundamentally broken.
That sounds incredibly painful.
It is. Thankfully, it's not as common as the first position. Now, the third position is a bit more complex. I'm okay, you're not okay. This is often tied to manipulative behavior, where someone puts themselves above others and sees them as inferior or untrustworthy.
I can see how that kind of thinking would cause problems in relationships, like always needing to be right or better than the other person.
Exactly. And this leads us to the fourth and final life position. I'm okay, you're okay. This is the healthy one, the balanced one, where someone sees both themselves and others as inherently worthy and capable.
Okay, so this is the ideal then, the goal we should be aiming for. But you mentioned earlier that the first 3 positions are often unconscious and formed during childhood. How do we reach this I'm okay, you're okay place if it's not something we're born with?
That's the key difference. The first 3 positions are rooted in our past experiences. But I'm okay, you're okay, is a choice we make as adults, a conscious decision. It's a decision to change our perspective, to challenge those old not okay recordings, and to approach ourselves and others with acceptance and respect.
So it's not about pretending everyone's perfect or ignoring our differences. It's about approaching relationships with a mindset of equality and respect, even when disagreements or conflicts come up.
You got it. It's about understanding that we all have our good and bad points. And that's all right. It's about choosing to communicate with understanding and empathy instead of judgment or blame.
I love that. It's like switching from a win-lose mindset to a win-win approach.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have these life positions, which are our beliefs about ourselves and others,
Yeah.
and we've got these ego states shaped by our early recordings. How does this work in practice? How do we use TA to improve our communication and relationships?
That's where the real work starts. And it all begins with awareness. Remember that high-fidelity recorder we mentioned? The key is to start noticing what's playing on those tapes.
So we need to become aware of when our parent or child ego states are taking over, especially when we're reacting in ways that feel out of control or don't quite make sense.
Exactly. Notice those patterns of criticism or defensiveness or self-doubt. Pay attention to your tone of voice, your body language, even the words you use. Become a detective of your own internal dialogue.
Okay, awareness is the first step. But what do we do once we start recognizing those patterns? How do we stop the parent and child ego states from taking over?
Harris has a simple yet powerful technique. Count 10. When you feel yourself getting caught up in a strong emotion or falling into a familiar pattern, pause for a few moments before you respond.
Like hitting pause on that internal tape recorder to give our adult ego state time to catch up.
Exactly. And during those 10 seconds, see if you can figure out which ego state is driving your reaction. Are you hearing those critical parent messages from the past? Are you feeling those child fears or insecurities bubbling up?
I see how that would help us separate the trigger from our response to give us more control.
Exactly. It's not about suppressing those emotions
Hmm.
or pretending they don't exist. It's about acknowledging them, understanding where they come from, and then making a conscious choice about how we want to respond.
So it's about empowering our adult ego state to make better decisions rather than letting our past experiences control us.
Exactly. And this takes practice. It's not going to happen overnight. But the more we become aware of our own patterns, the more we can interrupt those knee-jerk reactions and choose a different path.
Okay, so we have awareness and counting to 10. What about when we're dealing with someone else who's clearly operating from their parent or child ego state? How do we handle that?
That's where empathy and understanding come in. Remember that the child ego state is often driven by fear and a need for validation. So instead of getting defensive or getting into a power struggle, try to see the scared or hurt child behind their words.
Like remembering that everyone.
Even those who seem angry or critical is carrying their own baggage of early recordings and not okay feelings.
I know.
Exactly. And when we can approach others with that understanding, it can completely change how we interact.
This all makes sense theoretically, but I'm curious how TA works in real-life situations. For example, how can understanding these concepts help us have stronger relationships?
That's a great question. And it's something Harris dives into in the book. He uses this analogy of a broken cookie to show how not okay feelings from childhood can mess up even the most loving relationships.
A broken cookie. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So imagine you have a delicious cookie, but it's got a tiny piece missing. From an adult perspective, it's still a perfectly good cookie. You can still enjoy
Great,
it.
it's not a big deal.
But a child might see that missing piece and think the whole cookie is ruined, like it's not good enough.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. So in a relationship, those not okay feelings from childhood can make us super sensitive to any little flaw or imperfection in our partner.
Exactly. We forget to appreciate the whole wonderful person they are. We get hung up on those tiny missing pieces, and we start to feel resentful or disappointed.
And that creates conflict and tension.
Precisely. But the good news is that by understanding TA, we can start to see when we're reacting from that child ego state, and we can choose to focus on the positive parts of our partner and the relationship.
So TA can help us stop sweating the small stuff and appreciate what we have instead of getting caught up in those broken cookie anxieties.
That's a great way to put it, and that change in perspective can make a big difference.
This is fascinating. What about parenting? How does TA apply there?
One of the most helpful insights from TA for parents is the importance of adult-adult communication, even when our kids are behaving for their child ego state.
So even when our kids are having tantrums or acting out, we should try to stay calm and respond from our adult.
It's not always easy, but it can be really powerful. It's not about giving in to their demands or ignoring their feelings, but about setting clear boundaries while offering understanding and support.
So being the steady, rational force they can depend on, even when their emotions are all over the place. But how do we do that when they're screaming and yelling?
It's about recognizing that their behavior is often a way of communicating. They have an unmet need or a feeling they don't have the words for yet. By responding from our adult, we can help them learn to manage their emotions and develop better ways of coping.
It's like we're showing them the kind of behavior we want them to learn, instead of getting into a power struggle or reacting from our own parent or child ego states. What about when we lose it and react from our parent or child? Is there any hope for us then?
Of course, we're all human. We all make mistakes. The important thing is to forgive ourselves and to use those moments as opportunities to learn and grow.
So even those mess-ups can be valuable teaching moments for both us and our kids.
Absolutely. And speaking of learning and growth, TA also has some insights into broader social issues, like prejudice and discrimination.
I'm curious about that. How does TA connect to something as complex as prejudice?
Well, remember those early recordings we talked about? They don't just shape our individual ego states. They also help create societal tapes that are passed down through generations.
So those cultural norms and beliefs about different groups of people, those could be leftovers from those early recordings.
Exactly. For instance, if a child grows up hearing their parents say prejudiced things about a certain group, those messages become a part of their own parent ego state.
And those beliefs are then passed on to the next generation, perpetuating a cycle of prejudice and discrimination.
It's a powerful illustration of how those early recordings can impact society as a whole.
So how can we break this cycle? Can TA offer any solutions?
Just like on a personal level, it starts with awareness. We need to become more aware of those societal tapes that are playing in the background, influencing how we see and interact with others.
So questioning those assumptions and beliefs we've inherited from our culture and asking ourselves if they're really true.
Exactly. That's where education, open dialogue, and exposure to different viewpoints are so important. By bringing those societal tapes out into the open, we can start to challenge them and create a fairer and more just world.
Like, we need a collective emancipation of the adult to break free from those harmful societal recordings and create a society where everyone feels truly okay. This has been incredibly insightful. We've covered so much ground today.
It's been great exploring these ideas with you, and
Uh,
for those wanting to learn more, I definitely recommend reading the full book. I'm okay, you're okay.
I second that. It's packed with insights and practical tools for living a better life. Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive into I'm okay, you're okay, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to leave with?
I think if I had to pick one, it'd be that TA provides a framework to understand ourselves and others. It's about moving from those not okay feelings to a place of I'm okay, you're okay, recognizing that we all have these ego states within us and becoming more aware of how they shape our interactions.
So ultimately, using that awareness to build healthier and more fulfilling relationships.
Absolutely. It's about communicating more authentically and breaking free from those unconscious games that keep us stuck, choosing to respond with empathy and understanding rather than reacting from past hurts.
This has been such an eye-opener. I've definitely learned a lot about myself and my communication patterns, but it also makes me think about those bigger societal tapes we discussed. If our personal experiences shape our ego states, it seems those same forces are at play on a grander scale.
You're spot on. Those early recordings don't just affect our individual lives, they contribute to cultural norms and beliefs. And those beliefs have a huge impact on how we treat each other as a society.
So those individual not okay feelings can be amplified on a collective level, leading to prejudice, discrimination, even conflict between groups.
It is a sobering thought. But the good news is just like we can work on personal growth and healing, we can also aim for a more I'm okay, you're okay world.
So how do we achieve that? How do we move from those societal tapes to a place of understanding and acceptance?
Like personal growth, it starts with awareness. We have to bring to light those unconscious biases and prejudices that color our perceptions of others.
So question those assumptions we've inherited from our culture, our families, the media.
Exactly. That's where education and open dialogue are so vital, creating safe spaces to explore these sensitive topics, where we can listen and learn from those with different experiences.
Recognizing that our own viewpoints are limited, and there's always more to learn and understand.
Well said. And it's important to remember, this journey toward a more I'm okay, you're okay world doesn't mean pretending differences don't exist or that everyone has to agree on everything.
It's not about erasing individuality or pretending conflict doesn't exist. It's about navigating those differences with respect and compassion, even when it's hard.
That's it. It's about realizing we're all in this together. We each have unique stories, struggles, triumphs, and by approaching each other with curiosity and empathy, we can create a more harmonious and fulfilling world.
What an inspiring deep dive. I feel a sense of hope and possibility. That image of a world where everyone feels truly okay is powerful.
It certainly is. And remember, even small changes in awareness and behavior can make a difference. Each time we choose to respond from our adult ego state, each time we challenge a bias, each time we show compassion to someone different from us, we're contributing to that transformation.
A good reminder that we can all make a difference. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into I'm okay. You're okay. We hope this sparked new insights and inspired you to learn more.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep diving deep, keep learning, keep growing.
And remember,
You're okay.